The only thing I saved from the fire was a faded photograph and a small, rusty key. In the photo, she was smiling, her eyes full of promises she never planned to keep. The key, however, was a secret she never knew I had. For 5 years, I held on to them, remnants of a life that was burned to the ground. Today, I wasn't here to remember that life. I was here to bury it. The engine of the $400,000 Lamborghini Aventador hummed beneath me, a deep growl that sounded like justice. It was a sound she would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. My name is Martin Payne. I'm 34 years old, but some days, my heart feels like it's 100. I used to be a simple man from a small town in Ohio. I fixed old furniture, giving forgotten pieces a new life. My hands were always covered in sawdust and varnish, and I smelled like pine and hard work. I didn't have much money, but I had a heart full of love, and I thought that was enough. I gave all of that love to one person, Clarissa, the woman in the photograph. The woman who was about to get married in the grand estate just beyond these iron gates. I remember the last time I saw her parents. It was at their exclusive country club Christmas party. I had saved for 2 months to buy a decent suit, but next to their designer clothes, I felt like a child playing dress-up. Clarissa's father, a man whose hands had never seen a day of labor, looked at my calloused fingers and sneered. "A man is measured by what he provides, Martin," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "And from the looks of it, you can barely provide for yourself." Clarissa didn't defend me. She just looked away, her silence screaming her agreement. The real breaking point came a week later, on New Year's Eve. She took me to a rooftop party in the city. Surrounded by her wealthy friends, she raised a glass of champagne. "To a new year," one of them yelled. "What's your resolution, Clarissa?" She looked right at me, her eyes cold and empty. "To stop settling for less," she said. The entire group went quiet, their eyes darting between us. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "I'm tired of being with a broke boy who smells like wood. I deserve a man, not a project." My world shattered right there, under the exploding fireworks. What would you do if the person you loved humiliated you in front of everyone? Would you walk away quietly, or would you plan your revenge? I did neither. I simply disappeared. I packed a single bag, leaving behind the small apartment we shared and the life I thought we were building. I drove until my beat-up truck ran out of gas and sold it for a bus ticket to nowhere. For 5 years, no one heard from me. They all thought I had given up, that I was probably living a miserable life somewhere, broken and alone. They were wrong. I wasn't breaking, I was building. The wedding invitation arrived at my new address a month ago, forwarded by an old neighbor. It was a cruel joke, a final slap in the face. She was marrying some tech millionaire from California. The invitation was printed on thick, expensive paper, and it felt heavy in my hand, heavy with all the pain she had caused me. It was her way of saying, "Look what I have now. Look what you lost." But she had it all wrong. I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. The rusty key in my pocket was proof of that. A secret left behind by my grandfather that changed my entire world. The security guard at the gate looked at my car, then at the invitation on my passenger seat. His eyes were wide with confusion. "Name, sir?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Martin Payne," I said, my voice calm and steady. He checked his list, his finger tracing the names. He wouldn't find me on it. "I'm not on the list," I told him. "Just tell the bride that a ghost from her past has arrived. A very rich ghost." The guard spoke into his radio, and I watched as chaos slowly began to ripple through the perfect, manicured wedding grounds. He waved me through, his face pale. The driveway to the estate was long and winding, lined with 100-year-old oak trees. As I pulled up to the front, the valet boys froze, their mouths hanging open. The guests on the lawn turned to stare, their champagne glasses paused mid-air. The sound of my engine was the only thing you could hear, a beautiful, angry roar that announced my arrival. I put the car in park, the sound of the wedding music now completely drowned out. I could see the ceremony happening on a beautiful patio overlooking a lake. I could see her in her white dress, standing next to her new man. I let the engine idle for a full minute, making sure every single person saw me. Making sure she saw me. Then, I killed the engine, and a heavy silence fell over the entire wedding. It was the kind of quiet that feels louder than any noise. Slowly, I opened the scissor door of the Lamborghini, letting it rise like the wing of a fiery bird. I stepped out, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my old truck. Everyone was staring, their faces a perfect mix of shock and confusion. I wonder what they're all thinking. Let me know in the comments where you are watching this story unfold from. I straightened my tie, my eyes locking onto the altar. Clarissa had turned around, her face as white as her dress. Her new husband looked confused, then angry. Her father looked like he had seen a ghost. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the gravel crunching under my expensive Italian leather shoes. Clarissa's eyes were locked on mine, filled with a dawning horror. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew this was not a dream. And I knew something she didn't know. The rusty key in my pocket didn't just unlock my fortune, it was about to unlock her biggest secret. If you want to find out what happens next and see how this story ends, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss Chapter 2. I stood there, a ghost in a $1,000 suit, and watched as Clarissa's perfect world began to crack. The priest stopped talking, his words hanging in the air. Her new husband, a handsome man named Julian, took a step forward. His face was a storm of confusion and anger. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Clarissa. And in her eyes, I saw something more than just shock. I saw raw, cold fear. It was the look of someone whose darkest secret was about to walk into the light. She wasn't afraid of the man I was. She was terrified of what I knew. I ignored Julian's angry glare and turned my attention to Clarissa's father, Mr. Davenport. He was standing by the altar, his face turning a blotchy red. "Mr. Davenport," I said, my voice echoing across the silent lawn. "You once told me a man is measured by what he provides." I took a step closer, letting them all see the confidence in my eyes. "Tell me," I said, looking from his shocked face to my gleaming Lamborghini, "how would you measure me now?" He had no answer. He just sputtered, his pride wounded in front of all his rich and powerful friends. He had built his world on money, and I had just shown him what real power looked like. The memory of leaving town 5 years ago is still so clear. I was driving my old truck with only $200 in my pocket and a broken heart in my chest. I drove for 2 days, fueled by pain and cheap coffee, until I reached a small, quiet town in Colorado. I got a job at a local garage, fixing cars. The work was hard, and my hands, once covered in sawdust, were now stained with oil and grease. For a while, I was just a ghost, a man with no past and no future. I thought that was all I would ever be, until a letter changed my life forever. The letter was from a lawyer. It said my grandfather, a man I had only met a few times as a child, had passed away. I was his only living relative. I expected nothing. He had lived a simple life, just like me. But he had left me something. It wasn't money. It was a small, dusty box. Inside was an old letter, and the rusty key I now held in my pocket. The letter told me the key opened the door to an old shed on a piece of land he owned deep in the mountains. A shed that held the key to my future. What do you think was in that shed? Gold. A hidden treasure. For a moment, I let myself dream. I drove for hours to find the land. The shed was old and falling apart, exactly what you'd expect. Inside, it was a mess of dusty tools and rotten wood. My heart sank. Was this some kind of joke? I almost walked away. But then I remembered the last line of my grandfather's letter. "Martin," it said, "sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind the most ordinary doors." I looked around the shed again, and my eyes landed on a loose floorboard in the corner. Back at the wedding, the illusion of peace was gone. "Security!" Julian finally screamed, his voice breaking the silence. "Get him out of here! Now!" 2 large men in black suits started walking toward me. They were big, but their steps were hesitant. They didn't know who I was, and my confidence made them nervous. The guests were whispering, pulling out their phones to record the drama. This was better than any wedding entertainment they could have planned. I watched the guards approach, but I didn't move an inch. I wasn't afraid. My revenge was just getting started. Instead of fighting, I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The guards paused, watching me. I dialed a single number and put the phone to my ear. "It's me," I said calmly, my eyes still locked on Clarissa's father. "It's happening. Shut it all down." On the other end of the line, a voice simply said, "Consider it done." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The guards looked at each other, confused. Julian laughed. "Shut what down? Are you insane?" he mocked. He had no idea what was coming. He thought his money could protect him. "Let me take you back to that shed." Underneath the loose floorboard, I didn't find a box of gold. I found something much better. I found a stack of old leather journals. They were my grandfather's secret diaries. He wasn't just a simple woodworker. He was a genius, an inventor. The journals were filled with his ideas, his drawings, and his formulas. He had invented a new way to treat wood, making it stronger than steel but light as a feather. He had patents and designs for a technology that could change the world of construction forever. He just never had the money to make it happen. But the journals held more than just inventions. Tucked into the last book was a small envelope. Inside were documents and a letter. A letter explaining a dark secret that connected my family to the Davenports. It turns out, my grandfather and Mr. Davenport were business partners a long, long time ago. My grandfather was the inventor, and Mr. Davenport was the money man. But Mr. Davenport had betrayed him. He stole my grandfather's early ideas, built his entire company on them, and left my grandfather with nothing, forcing him into a life of poverty. He destroyed my family. Back at the wedding, a strange thing started to happen. A phone buzzed. Then another. And another. Julian's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. Then his best man's phone. Then Clarissa's father's. A wave of alerts swept through the most powerful people at the wedding. Julian pulled out his phone, his face annoyed. He looked at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. His jaw went slack. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with pure terror. He looked at me, his anger gone, replaced by disbelief. "What?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" I looked at Julian, the man who had taken my place, and I gave him a cold, simple smile. "What did I do?" I repeated his question, my voice low but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I didn't do anything to you, Julian. I just sent a press release." All around us, the phones kept buzzing. Julian's best man was staring at his screen, his mouth wide open. "The stock," the man whispered. "It's crashing. We've lost 50% of our value in 2 minutes." Julian looked at me, his mind unable to understand. "How?" he begged. "How could you do this?" "It's easy when you have a better product," I explained, enjoying the confusion on his face. "For the past 5 years, while you and Clarissa were drinking champagne, I was building a company. I took my grandfather's ideas and I made them real. My company, Phoenix Timber, launched on the stock market this morning. We create a building material that is cheaper, stronger, and better for the planet than anything your tech company uses. The news of my product just made your entire business model worthless." I had used their own rules of business to bring their empire down. The work was the hardest thing I had ever done. After I found my grandfather's journals, I spent a year just studying, learning everything I could. I used the small amount of money from selling my grandfather's land to rent a small workshop. I worked day and night, sleeping on the floor, living off instant noodles. I found engineers who believed in my vision. We failed hundreds of times. There were explosions, fires, and moments I wanted to give up. But every time I felt weak, I would look at that old, faded photograph of Clarissa, and the memory of her cruel laugh would fuel my fire. My goal was never just to become rich. My goal was justice. My lawyers told me it would be hard to prove what Mr. Davenport did to my grandfather so many years ago. So we made a new plan. Instead of fighting him in court for the past, I would defeat him in the market for the future. We planned everything down to the last second. We would announce our company and its revolutionary technology at exactly 1 p.m. on Saturday. The exact moment Clarissa was scheduled to say, "I do." It was a poetic justice my grandfather would have loved. Back at the wedding, the party was over. The beautiful music had stopped. The guests were no longer celebrating, they were panicking. They were all rich people who had invested in Julian's company. They were watching their money disappear in real time, right on their phones. Mr. Davenport rushed over to Julian, his face purple with rage. "What is going on?" he screamed. "My entire retirement was in your stock." He grabbed Julian by the arm, completely forgetting about his daughter and her ruined wedding. He only cared about his money. It was then that he finally turned his angry eyes to me. "You!" he shouted, pointing a shaky finger at me. "This is because of you. You were always a worthless, jealous boy." He started walking toward me, his eyes full of hate. He saw me as the same poor kid he had insulted at that Christmas party years ago. He had no idea who I had become. I didn't flinch. I let him come closer. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the reason I was really here. The stocks, the company, the Lamborghini, they were all just tools. The real revenge was for my grandfather, a good man whose life he had ruined. "This was never about money, Mr. Davenport," I said calmly as he got closer. "This is about this." I reached into my suit pocket and slowly pulled out the small, rusty key. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger. It looked like a piece of junk, old and worthless. But the moment Mr. Davenport saw it, he stopped dead in his tracks. All the anger drained from his face, replaced by the same pure fear I had seen in his daughter's eyes. He recognized the key. He knew exactly what it was for, and he knew his life was now over. My grandfather's last journal entry was not about inventions. It was a story. He wrote about the day he and Mr. Davenport were supposed to become official partners. They had one copy of the signed contract. For safekeeping, they placed it in a brand-new safe deposit box at the bank downtown. They each received a key. A week later, Mr. Davenport told my grandfather there had been a fire at his office and the contract was destroyed. He said they would have to write a new one. But my grandfather never saw him again. Mr. Davenport used the lie to steal the entire company. I held the key up for all the guests to see. "This key," I announced, my voice booming with power, "opens safe deposit box 142 at the First National Bank downtown. A box that contains the original, signed partnership agreement between my grandfather and Mr. Davenport." I looked directly into his terrified eyes. "The contract you told everyone was destroyed in a fire 50 years ago. The contract that proves you are a liar, a fraud, and a thief." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The whispers turned into shouts. Mr. Davenport made a strange gurgling sound and stumbled backward, collapsing into a chair. Clarissa screamed, "Daddy!" and rushed to his side. But I wasn't looking at them anymore. My eyes were fixed on Julian. "You married into a family of thieves, Julian," I said, my voice like ice. "The seed money your father-in-law gave you to start your precious company? It was stolen. It was my family's money." I let the words hang in the air, letting everyone understand the truth. "Which means, according to the law, your company, your house, your entire life, it all belongs to me." My words fell into a dead silent crowd. "It all belongs to me." For a second, nobody moved. Then, a broken sound cut through the air. It was Julian, laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man watching his world burn down. "You're insane," he choked out, but his eyes told a different story. He knew the law. He knew that a tree grown from a stolen seed bears stolen fruit. His entire company, his whole life, was the fruit of my family's stolen seed. And I was here to take it all back. Clarissa, however, scrambled up from her father's side. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a wild fury. "You monster!" she shrieked, her voice raw with hate. "You did this to me. You planned this. You came here to ruin my perfect day." I looked at her, the woman I once loved, and I felt nothing but a cold, sad emptiness. "Your perfect day was built on a 50-year-old lie, Clarissa," I said calmly. "You didn't want a man. You wanted a bank account. You made your choice a long time ago. I'm not ruining your life. I'm just showing you the price tag." A man in an expensive suit, probably one of Julian's lawyers, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous," he announced to the nervous guests. "He has no proof. He has an old key and a crazy story, that's all. How do we know this contract even exists?" The crowd murmured in agreement. They were looking for any reason to not believe me, to hope their investments were safe. They needed to see it with their own eyes. They thought my whole plan rested on a piece of paper that might not even be real. They were about to be very disappointed. I smiled. "Proof? You want proof?" I took out my phone again, but this time I didn't make a call. I pressed a button, and a projector I had my team set up earlier whirred to life. A huge image appeared on the white wall of the main wedding tent. It was a high-definition video. The video showed me, just this morning, sitting in a sterile bank vault with two bank managers. It showed my rusty key sliding into safe deposit box 142. It showed the steel door swinging open and my hands pulling out an old, yellowed document. The camera zoomed in, and the whole world could now see it. A contract, signed by my grandfather and a young Mr. Davenport. Watching that video made me think of a different time. A flashback hit me like a wave. I was back in my old, dusty workshop. I had just finished making a ring for Clarissa out of a beautiful piece of oak wood. It wasn't a diamond, it wasn't gold, but I had poured all my love into it. I knelt on the sawdust-covered floor and asked her to marry me. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the simple wooden ring. "Yes, Martin. Yes," she had cried. "It's the most beautiful ring in the world. Where did that girl go? What changed her so much?" Back in the present, the video ended, leaving the image of the signed contract burning on the screen. The truth was out, and it was undeniable. The guests stared, speechless. Julian looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Clarissa saw it all, the proof, her father's guilt, the cold look in Julian's eyes as he stared at her. Her whole world, everything she had betrayed me for, was gone in an instant. And in her desperation, she did the last thing I ever expected. She ran to me, her beautiful white dress dragging in the dirt, and she fell to her knees before me. "Martin, please," she begged, grabbing my hand. Her tears were real this time, hot and full of pain. "Please, don't do this. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake." The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the beautiful bride begged the man she had thrown away. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was always you. I was just a fool." For a heartbeat, my resolve wavered. A part of me, the old Martin, wanted to believe her, to pull her up and hold her. "What would you do? Could you forgive someone who broke you so completely?" I looked down at her, my face like stone, even though my heart felt a tremor of pity. "If that's true, Clarissa," I said softly, "then tell me the real reason. Why did you leave me? Why did you humiliate me like that? I need to hear the truth from you, right here, in front of everyone." This was her final test. Her last chance. I wanted to know if there was even a small piece of the girl I once loved left inside her, or if it was all just another lie to save herself. The entire wedding, and what was left of our story, waited for her answer. Clarissa took a shaky breath, her whole body trembling. "It was my father," she confessed, looking at the broken man in the chair. "He found out who you were, that you were his old partner's grandson. He was terrified you would uncover his secret. He told me I had to leave you. He said if I didn't, he would find a way to ruin your life, to make sure you ended up with nothing. He forced me to be cruel to you. He wanted to hurt you so badly that you would never, ever come back. So, it wasn't just greed. It was fear. A twisted, selfish kind of protection." Julian had heard enough. He had watched his fortune vanish and his bride confess her love for another man. With a quiet, final anger, he pulled the multi-carat diamond ring from his own finger and dropped it on the ground beside Clarissa. "The wedding is off," he said, his voice flat and dead. He then looked at me, not with anger, but with the cold acceptance of a defeated businessman. "My lawyers will call your lawyers on Monday." He turned and walked away, not even looking back at the woman he was about to marry. The show was over. He was cutting his losses. The guests started to leave quickly and quietly, not wanting to be part of the wreckage anymore. Soon, it was just me, a crying bride on the ground, and a broken old man in a chair. I had won. I had everything. The money, the company, the revenge, the justice. My plan had worked perfectly. So why did I feel so empty? I looked at the mess I had made, at the woman who had shattered my heart and whose heart I had now shattered in return. I had avenged my grandfather, but standing there in my victory, I had never felt more alone. The last car disappeared down the long driveway, leaving behind a silence that was louder than all the shouting before. The beautiful white chairs were empty. Half-eaten plates of expensive food sat on tables, forgotten. The wedding was a graveyard of broken dreams, and I was the ghost who had haunted it. Clarissa's quiet sobs were the only sound in the world. I had won. I had taken a sledgehammer to their perfect crystal castle. But as I stood there in the ruins, the fire of my revenge turned to cold ash in my stomach. The victory I had dreamed of for 5 years felt hollow. Mr. Davenport, who had been sitting like a statue of a broken man, finally moved. He pushed himself up from his chair, his body looking old and frail. He didn't look at me with hate. His eyes were empty, defeated. "Take it," he whispered, his voice thin and raspy. "Take everything. The company, the houses, all of it. It's yours. It always should have been." He took a shaky step toward his daughter, who was still crumpled on the ground. "Just, please," he begged, "leave her out of this now. This was my sin. Punish me, but don't hurt her any more." I looked at the two of them, the powerful man who had crushed my family, now begging for his child, and the woman who broke my heart, now weeping in a dirty wedding dress. 4 years, my anger had been a shield. It protected me from the pain. But now, with my revenge complete, the shield was gone, and I felt the weight of my choice. I had the power to ruin them, to send him to jail and take every penny she had. What kind of man did I want to be? Was I a destroyer? Or was there another way? My mind flashed back to my grandfather's journal. I remembered reading a page that had nothing to do with inventions. It was about his life after Mr. Davenport's betrayal. "Revenge," he wrote, "is a fire that burns the whole forest just to kill one snake. When the smoke clears, you find the snake is dead, but you are standing in the ashes, all alone." I finally understood. I was standing in the ashes. My snake was dead, but I was completely and utterly alone. My grandfather wasn't just leaving me his inventions. He was leaving me a warning. I made a decision. I looked at Mr. Davenport, his face pale and waiting for his sentence. "I don't want your money," I said. His eyes widened in shock. "I want something more valuable. I want the truth. You will hold a press conference, and you will tell the entire world what you did to my grandfather. You will confess everything. You will not just give back the money, you will give back his good name. You will clear the name of the man you destroyed." This wasn't the punishment he was expecting. He was a man who lived and died by his public image, and I was about to take that from him. Then I turned to Clarissa. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "And you," I said, my voice hard, "you think you can wash away your guilt with tears? You don't get off that easy." She flinched, expecting the final, cruel blow. "You're going to work for me." Clarissa stared at me, confused. "Work for you?" she whispered. "What are you talking about?" This was the part of my plan no one could have predicted. Not even her. Was this another, more clever punishment? Or was it something else entirely? "My grandfather always dreamed of using his inventions to help people," I explained. "He wanted to build things that mattered. I'm starting a foundation in his name to do just that. We will build schools in poor neighborhoods and homes for people who have none. And you, Clarissa, will run it. Every day, you will use the money your father stole to fix the world he helped break. You will learn what it feels like to build something real, instead of just living inside a pretty, empty castle." It was a life sentence of service. Her prison would be a world of charity and hard work. They were both completely stunned. This was a revenge they couldn't understand. I wasn't sending them to jail. I wasn't taking all their money for myself. I was forcing them to face their own selfishness and greed every single day by doing good. I was forcing them onto a path of redemption, whether they wanted it or not. I knew this would be a heavier burden for them to carry than any prison sentence. It was a justice my grandfather would have found fitting, poetic and powerful. With my decision made, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The emptiness began to fade, replaced by a feeling of purpose. I had avenged my grandfather, not with destruction, but with creation. I turned my back on the ruined wedding, on Clarissa and her father. "My lawyers will be in touch with the terms," I said over my shoulder. I didn't need to look at them anymore. I walked away, down the long, gravel driveway, leaving the wreckage of their lives behind me. I didn't even glance at the Lamborghini, a car that now felt like it belonged to a different person. I reached the grand iron gates at the end of the driveway, ready to leave this chapter of my life behind for good. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up beside me, its window gliding down silently. It was Julian. His face was calm, his eyes sharp and calculating, all emotion gone. "That was quite a show back there, Payne," he said, his voice even. "I can respect a man who burns down the world to make a point." He paused, looking me over. "But now you have a problem. You're an inventor, not a CEO. You have the company, but you'll run it into the ground in 6 months." He leaned closer. "You need me." I stared at Julian, the man whose wedding I had just destroyed. An hour ago, we were enemies. Now, he was offering me a job, or rather, offering to work for me. The world had turned upside down. "Why?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "Why would you help me? I took everything from you." Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. "You took the company's assets, Payne, not its soul. I built it from nothing. Without me, all you own is a pile of patents and empty offices. It will die in a year. I'd rather own 20% of a thriving empire than 100% of a failure. I am a builder. I don't care who owns the team, as long as I get to play." His words made a cold, hard sense that I couldn't ignore. He was right. For 5 years, my life had been about one thing: revenge. I was an inventor, a man who understood wood and tools and secrets. What did I know about global markets or supply chains? The thought of sitting in board meetings, of managing thousands of employees, made me feel tired already. Julian was offering me a way out, a path to secure my grandfather's legacy without becoming a man I didn't recognize. But it felt like a trap. Could I really trust the snake whose skin I had just shed? My mind went back to the early days, right after I found the journals. I had tried to get a loan to build my first prototype. I sat in a small bank office, my hands clean but my clothes cheap. The banker, a man with a slick smile, looked at my grandfather's designs and then at me. He made me feel small and foolish. He drowned me in complicated words and numbers I didn't understand. I ended up signing a deal that cost me almost all my savings for a tiny loan. I learned a hard lesson that day. In their world, knowledge wasn't about what you could build, but what you could take. "What are your terms?" I asked Julian, my voice steady. I would not be that foolish boy in the bank ever again. Julian's eyes lit up. He was back in his element, making a deal. "I want 20% of the company," he said without hesitation. "And full control as CEO. You are the owner and the face of the company, but I run the day-to-day operations. You have the vision. I build the machine that makes it real." He was asking for a lot. He was asking for the keys to the kingdom I had just conquered. This was a test. I looked him straight in the eye, letting him see the steel that 5 years of hardship had built in me. 10%, I countered. "And you are the CEO, but you report to a board, and I am the chairman of that board. The final decision on everything is mine. No exceptions." I leaned in closer. "And Julian," I said, my voice low, "if you ever betray me, your contract ensures you walk away with nothing. You will leave with only the suit on your back. Those are my terms." I had to know if he was here for the opportunity or for revenge. A slow smile spread across Julian's face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of respect between two predators. "Deal," he said, sticking his hand out of the car window. I looked at his hand, the same one that had almost placed a ring on Clarissa's finger. This was crazy. I was making a deal with my enemy, a man I had every reason to hate. But my grandfather's dream was bigger than my hate. I took his hand and shook it. The handshake was firm, cold, and felt like the beginning of a dangerous new chapter. "Get in," Julian said, unlocking the passenger door. I got into the car that was supposed to take him and his new bride on their honeymoon. The silence was heavy as he drove away from the wreckage of the wedding. "First order of business, partner," Julian said, suddenly all business. "Davenport's confession. It's a problem. A big one." I was confused. "What do you mean?" "It's what I wanted. It's justice." Julian shook his head. "Justice is messy, Martin. A public confession will trigger lawsuits from everyone. It will tie the company up in legal battles for years. We need to control the story." My grandfather's journal had a page about Mr. Davenport's father, a man he described as a shark in a tailored suit. He wrote that Mr. Davenport wasn't born evil, he was just weak. His father had pushed him, bullied him, and threatened him into betraying my grandfather. He had been a puppet his whole life, first for his father, and then for his own greed. The real poison came from the generation before. The story was more complicated than I knew, and I had a feeling Julian understood these kinds of complicated family dynamics better than I did. "We don't stop the confession," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a brilliant, cold idea. "We produce it. We hire a director. We turn it into a documentary. We frame it as a story of redemption. We tell the world how Phoenix Timber was born from a historic injustice, now made right. We don't hide from the scandal, Martin. We turn the scandal into our brand. We make our company a legend." I was speechless. He wanted to turn my family's pain into a marketing campaign. It was ruthless, cynical, and probably the smartest thing I had ever heard. He saw the look on my face. "Welcome to the big leagues, Martin." He pulled the car to a stop in front of a giant skyscraper made of glass and steel that touched the clouds. Glowing blue letters above the entrance spelled out, "Phoenix Timber." My company. My building. I had never even seen it in person. "Welcome to the office, boss," Julian said with a smirk. As I stared up at the impossible building, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. An old, raspy voice crackled on the line. "You think this is over, boy? You think you've won? You just started a war you can't possibly finish." The old man's voice on the phone was like scraping metal, and it sent a chill down my spine. The line went dead, but his words hung in the air. "You just started a war you can't possibly finish." I lowered the phone, my mind racing. Standing in front of my gleaming new skyscraper, I felt like a boy playing king, and the real ruler of the land had just called to tell me my time was up. Julian watched my face, his expression sharp and curious. "Who was that?" he asked. I looked from the phone to Julian. "I think," I said slowly, "I just met the real devil." Julian's eyes narrowed, and then a look of understanding dawned on his face. "Alastair Davenport," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "Clarissa's grandfather. Of course. The old shark still has his teeth." I was confused. "You know him?" Julian nodded. "Everyone in this world knows of him. He's the man who built the Davenport Empire. His son, Clarissa's father, is just the caretaker. Alastair is the ghost in the machine, ruthless, invisible, with connections that run so deep you could never find the bottom. He's been retired for a decade, but a man like that never truly lets go of his power." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an urgent email from my legal team. I read the first line and my blood ran cold. "The bank has frozen the safe deposit box," I told Julian, my voice tight. "A judge just signed an emergency order. They're claiming the contents are part of a criminal investigation that doesn't exist." The war had already begun. While I was at the wedding, the old man was in the shadows, pulling strings, and he had just cut the rope to my most important piece of evidence. He was trying to erase the truth before it could ever see the light of day. Julian didn't even flinch. He was calm, almost energized by the news. "Predictable," he said with a shrug. "He's a master at using the law as a weapon. But he's old school. He thinks a piece of paper is the only proof that matters." Julian looked at me, a glint in his eye. He doesn't know we live in a world where a video is more powerful than any contract. He just made his first mistake. He showed us his hand. We release our documentary trailer today. We tell our story before he can invent a new one. He was a general, and the battle had just begun. A memory from my grandfather's journal surfaced in my mind. He wrote about meeting Alastair Davenport only once, 50 years ago. My grandfather was a young inventor, full of hope. Alastair was already a powerful man. He didn't shake my hand, my grandfather wrote. He looked at me like a butcher looks at a pig. His eyes were black and dead, like a shark's. I knew then that his son was just a puppet. The real danger, the real evil, was the man holding the strings. My grandfather had seen the truth of him in a single glance. We went up the elevator, the ride silent and fast. We stepped into my office on the top floor. It was bigger than my entire old house, with glass walls that showed the whole city spread out below. It felt like standing on top of the world, but all I felt was the weight of it. While I stared out the window, Julian went into action. He was a whirlwind of energy, calling his team of lawyers and PR experts. He was speaking a language of countermotions and media blasts that I didn't understand. My revenge had been simple. This was complex. This was war. My phone vibrated again. I expected another lawyer, another problem. But it was a text from a number I knew all too well. It was Clarissa. My heart skipped a beat. The message was short and frantic. "Martin, my grandfather is here. He's scaring me. He's talking about destroying you, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. He thinks I'm on his side. Please, you need to meet me. I have to warn you about what he's planning." What was this? Was she really trying to help me? Or was the old shark using his own granddaughter as bait to lure me into a trap? I showed the text to Julian. He read it and scoffed, shaking his head. "It's a trap, Martin. Don't be a fool. Alastair is a classic predator. He'll use the person you care about to get to you. He wants to get you alone, away from us, where you're vulnerable. He'll have you cornered before you even know what's happening. Don't go. Let the lawyers handle this. This is business now, not personal." He was right. Every logical part of my brain screamed that he was right. It was the smart move. The safe move. But my gut told me something different. I thought of Clarissa's confession at the wedding. I saw the genuine fear in her eyes when she talked about her father forcing her to leave me. She was a victim of these men, too. A puppet, just like her father. Maybe she was finally ready to cut her own strings. She knew things I didn't. She was on the inside. She could be the key to everything. "I'm going to meet her," I said, my voice firm. Julian looked at me like I was crazy. "She'll lead you to the slaughter," he warned. "I know," I said, a plan forming in my mind. A spark of my own strategic fire finally lighting up. I was done just reacting. It was my turn to set the board. I'm not going there to trust her. I'm going there to see whose side she's really on. I looked at Julian, the man who was supposed to be my enemy but was now my only ally. And I'm not going to walk into his trap. I paused, letting the idea settle. "You and I are going to set a trap of our own." Julian's worried expression slowly transformed into a calculating, dangerous smile. Julian's smile was that of a chess master who sees the final move. We stood in my new office, which he had already turned into a war room. On a large white screen, he drew a map of the park where Clarissa wanted to meet. "Alastair wants a private meeting in a public place," Julian explained. "It's a classic move. It feels safe, but it gives him control." He pointed at me. "You will go in alone, but you won't be alone. You'll be wearing this." He held up a simple-looking button for my shirt. It looked completely ordinary. "This is our eyes and ears." The button was a piece of technology from our own company's secret research department. It was a tiny camera and microphone, more powerful than anything the police had. It could send a perfect, clear signal through walls and electronic noise. "Alastair will be looking for a wire from a spy movie," Julian said as his tech expert carefully replaced a button on my shirt. "He's an old shark. He's not expecting a fisherman with a satellite." The plan was simple. I was the bait, and we would broadcast whatever happened live to a secure server, collecting perfect evidence of his threats. As the tiny camera was clipped into place, I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the office window. Just a few months ago, I was a man who spent his days with wood and varnish, a man whose biggest worry was fixing a wobbly table leg. Now I was preparing for a secret meeting, wearing a spy camera, about to face off against a powerful old man who wanted to destroy me. I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Was I becoming one of them? A person who lived in a world of tricks and traps. I had to remind myself, I was doing this for justice, not for sport. I arrived at the park cafe and saw her immediately. Clarissa was sitting at a table in the corner, under a large oak tree. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking as she held a coffee cup, and she kept looking over her shoulder. She looked like a scared child, not a woman who had once torn my world apart. I walked over and sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. In my ear, I could hear Julian's voice through a tiny, invisible earpiece. "We see you, Martin. We hear everything. The show is on." Clarissa looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "We don't have much time," she whispered. "What is it, Clarissa? What's the warning?" I asked, my voice calm on the outside, but my mind racing. Was this an act? Was she a good enough actor to fake that level of fear? "It's worse than you think," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My grandfather. He isn't trying to take the company back in court. He's trying to put you in jail. He has hired people to create fake evidence, fake emails, a whole false story to prove that you are a criminal. He's going to tell the world you forged your grandfather's journals." This was a new level of evil. He wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase me. My mind reeled. How could I fight something like that? It would be his powerful word against the word of a man who, until recently, had nothing. "How do you know this?" I asked, my voice sharp. This was the test. Her answer would tell me everything. Without a word, she reached into her purse and slid a tiny USB drive across the table, hiding it with her hand. "He's arrogant," she whispered. "He thinks I'm a loyal little puppet. He dictated his entire plan to his lawyers over the phone while I was in the room. I recorded it all. It's on this drive, Martin. Everything." Just as my fingers touched the drive, a shadow fell over our table. I looked up and my blood ran cold. Two huge men in dark suits stood behind Clarissa. And stepping out from behind the tree was Alastair Davenport himself. He had a cruel, satisfied smile on his ancient face. "How touching," he rasped, his eyes like chips of ice. "A lover's reunion." Clarissa gasped and turned pale. "Grandfather!" "No!" she cried out. He had followed her. The meeting was a trap after all, just not in the way I expected. She seemed genuinely shocked to see him. Alastair ignored his granddaughter completely. His dead shark eyes were locked on me. "Did you really think she would betray her family for you, boy?" he sneered. "A girl raised with wealth and power?" He pointed a bony finger at the USB drive in my hand. "That little toy is a virus. The second you plug it into your computer, it will destroy every file, every server, every piece of data you own. And this little meeting, it was just to give my men a chance to take what's mine, starting with the contract you think protects you." I looked at the old man, at his thugs, at the terrified girl, and I smiled. "The contract is very safe, Alastair," I said calmly. "But I'm glad you came. You saved me the trouble of tracking you down." Alastair looked confused, and in that moment of confusion, Julian's voice, amplified and clear, came from a small speaker hidden in the centerpiece on our table. "Alastair Davenport, you might want to fix your tie. You're on camera." All around us, the ordinary parkgoers, the woman reading a book, the man walking his dog, the couple having coffee, stood up. They weren't civilians. They were journalists, holding cameras pointed right at him. Alastair was caught. His jaw dropped as he saw the press surrounding him. His plan was ruined, his threats exposed. Julian, ever the showman, had leaked the location of Martin Payne's first exclusive interview just minutes before I arrived. Alastair's face went from shock to pure, boiling rage. But then, something changed. The rage disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating smile that was more terrifying than his anger. He looked at his crying granddaughter. "You chose him," he said, his voice deadly quiet. He pulled out his phone and made a 1-second call. "It's done," he said into the phone. "Sell it all. Immediately." Alastair Davenport snapped his phone shut, a look of grim victory on his face. The reporters, smelling fresh blood in the water, swarmed him. "Mr. Davenport, who were you on the phone with?" one shouted. "What did you just sell?" another demanded. Alastair simply smiled, a chilling, empty smile, and let his two large men push a path for him through the chaos. Before he disappeared into a waiting black car, he gave me one final look. It was the look of a king who had just set fire to his own castle, and it clearly said, "If I can't have it, no one can." The moment he was gone, the park erupted into a storm of noise and confusion. Julian was already on his phone, his voice sharp and urgent. "Find out what he sold," he barked at his finance team. "Check every holding, every asset now." He paced back and forth like a caged tiger. I turned to Clarissa. She was standing frozen, shaking like a leaf, her face as white as a ghost. "Clarissa, what did he do?" I asked, my voice gentle. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a horror so deep it made my own stomach clench. "He sold the foundation," she whispered. "He sold everything." I didn't understand. The foundation? What did that mean? I was expecting to hear he had sold his shares in one company, or maybe a building. But Clarissa explained, the words tumbling out of her in a rush of panic. The family's real power, the part that controlled everything, was never in my father's name. My grandfather locked the controlling shares of every Davenport company into a single, private foundation decades ago. He was the only one who could touch it. It was the heart of the empire, and he just ripped it out. Julian hung up the phone, his face pale. The usual confidence in his eyes was gone, replaced by disbelief. "She's right," he said, his voice flat. "He did it." Alastair just sold 100% of the Davenport Foundation to a corporate rating firm from overseas. A company famous for one thing: buying empires, tearing them apart, and selling the pieces for scrap. My mind struggled to grasp the scale of it. Alastair hadn't just given up a piece of his kingdom. He had sold the entire kingdom to barbarians, just to make sure I could never sit on the throne. A memory from my grandfather's journal came rushing back to me. He had written about Alastair's character, trying to understand the man who had wronged him. "A king like Alastair does not love his castle," the entry read. "He only loves the power it gives him. If that power is ever threatened, he feels no loyalty to the bricks and stones. He would sooner poison the wells and salt the earth of his own land than surrender it to an enemy." My grandfather had written those words 50 years ago, and Alastair had just proven them true. "This is a disaster," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "A complete catastrophe. My old company, the one we now own, was completely dependent on the Davenport network. Our suppliers, our shipping lines, our banking relationships, it was all interwoven. This new firm will cancel every contract. They will call in every loan. They will strangle us." He looked at me, the reality of the situation sinking in. Phoenix Timber is now an island, completely cut off from the world. We'll be bankrupt in a month. He didn't just take our new empire away, he destroyed our old one, too. At the mention of the word bankrupt, Clarissa let out a heartbreaking sob. "This is my fault," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I did this. I should have known. He warned me." She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and regret. "He told me once, long ago, that the family was everything. He said if I ever put anyone before the family name, he would burn that name to the ground so there would be nothing left for anyone to inherit. He wasn't punishing you, Martin. He was punishing me." Amidst the wreckage of my victory, I looked down at the tiny USB drive still clutched in my hand. It was the recording of Alastair's plan to frame me. A plan he had now thrown away for this new, more destructive one. Was this drive now useless? A relic of a battle that was already over? But then I remembered Clarissa's exact words. He dictated his entire plan to his lawyers. What else might be on that recording? What other secrets might a man like Alastair have discussed, thinking he was safe among family? It felt like a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane, but it was the only light we had left. I looked at Julian, the man I had beaten, The man whose life I had turned upside down twice in one day. His face was grim, his eyes staring at a future that had just been erased. "So," I said, my voice quiet, "is this where you walk away? Our deal was for 10% of an empire. There is no more empire. There's just a sinking ship." This was the real test. I was giving him an out. A chance to escape the disaster I had dragged him into. I wouldn't have blamed him if he took it. Julian was quiet for a long time. He looked at the chaos around us, at the crying woman, at the city skyline where our building stood like a tombstone. He looked defeated. But then he turned his eyes to me, and deep inside them, a new fire began to burn. The fire of a fighter who had been knocked down but was not knocked out. "Walk away," he said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Martin, you took everything from me once today. Alistair Davenport just did it again." He stepped closer and clapped me hard on the shoulder. "I'm not walking away. I'm doubling my bet. We're going to war. The question is, are you?" Julian's question hung in the air, a challenge thrown down in the middle of our ruined battlefield. "Are you in?" he asked, his eyes burning with a new kind of fire. This wasn't the arrogant CEO I had met at the wedding. This was a fighter, a man who had lost everything twice in one day and was still standing, ready for another round. I looked at him, then at Clarissa, who was wiping her tears, a new resolve hardening her soft features. We were a strange, broken little team, the vengeful inventor, the disgraced CEO, and the runaway bride. And in that moment, I knew my grandfather's warning about standing alone in the ashes was a test. I had a choice. I could stay alone, or I could build something new with the people the fire had left behind. "I'm in," I said. We went back to the office, not as a war room, but as a last stand. The mood was heavy. The 1-month deadline felt like a clock ticking down to zero. While Julian worked the phones, trying to stop the bleeding and calm our panicked investors, Clarissa and I focused on the only thing we had left, the USB drive. It felt so small and insignificant in my hand, a tiny piece of plastic against a mountain of problems. We plugged it into my computer, the clicking sound echoing in the silent room. We put on headphones, sharing them between us, and pressed play. For the first 20 minutes, it was exactly what Clarissa had described. We heard Alistair's cold, raspy voice telling his lawyers how to create fake emails and bribe witnesses to frame me. It was disgusting, but it wasn't useful. Alistair's new plan had made this one obsolete. We were about to give up. The recording was a dead end. My heart sank. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe we were just on a sinking ship with no life rafts. I reached for the mouse to stop the recording, but Clarissa put her hand on mine. "Wait," she whispered. "Listen. He's bragging." I put the headphones back on. Alistair, in his supreme arrogance, had kept talking after laying out his plan. He was laughing with his lawyer. "This Orion group is perfect," Alistair cackled on the recording. "So hungry. They'll burn the whole country down for a profit." Then came the words that changed everything. "They have no idea the best part of their business, their secret offshore accounts, were my invention. I've been washing money through their shell corporations for 20 years. We looked at each other, our eyes wide. It wasn't just a recording of a crime he was planning. It was a confession to a much bigger crime he had been committing for decades. My grandfather wrote in his journal, "A snake's greatest weakness is that it thinks everyone else is a worm." Alistair was a snake. He saw the world as full of worms, and he never imagined one of them could have a recording of his deepest, darkest secrets. He had just handed us the weapon we needed to save ourselves. He had not just sold the kingdom to barbarians. He had confessed that he was the one who secretly taught the barbarians how to steal. He had tied his own fate to theirs, and he didn't even know it. Julian came over, drawn by the look on our faces. We played him the confession. He listened, and for the first time since the wedding, a genuine predatory smile returned to his face. "Checkmate," he breathed. The plan was simple, and it was brutal. We didn't leak the recording to the press. That was too messy, too slow. Julian, using his old contacts, found the private email addresses for every single board member of the Orion Group. We drafted a simple message: "Your new acquisition comes with a 20-year federal racketeering investigation. We have the proof." The enclosed audio file is a sample. Cancel the sale within 24 hours, or this recording goes to the Department of Justice and the front page of every newspaper in the world. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. We waited. Then, the call came. It was the CEO of Orion Group. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. The sale was off. The contracts were void. They were running for the hills, wanting nothing to do with the toxic empire Alistair had tried to sell them. Just like that, the war was over. Alistair had tried to burn his kingdom down, but he had used his own secrets as gasoline, and in the end, the only person who got burned was him. He was ruined, disgraced, and facing an investigation that would put him away for the rest of his life. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Julian, true to his word, became the CEO of Phoenix Timber. He was a brilliant leader, and with my grandfather's technology, our company was changing the world, building stronger, safer, and cheaper homes for people everywhere. And Clarissa found her own redemption. She took her new role as head of the Payne Foundation seriously. She poured all her energy into it, using the profits from our company to build schools and hospitals. She was no longer a princess in a castle. She was a queen building a new, better kingdom. And me? I found my way back home. I stood in a new workshop, filled with the familiar, comforting smell of pine and sawdust. I was the chairman of the board, the owner of a global company, but my real office was here, among my tools. I was a builder again. Clarissa walked in, holding plans for a new community center. We weren't in love anymore, but we were partners. We were friends, building something real on the ashes of our past. I had my revenge, but it wasn't the fire of destruction that brought me peace. It was the quiet joy of creating something that would last. This story is a reminder that the greatest victory isn't about tearing down what you hate, but about building up what you love. True power isn't found in a fancy car or a big bank account, but in the strength to forgive, the courage to rebuild, and the wisdom to know what truly matters in the end. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it gave you hope, please do us a small favor. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories just like this one. Thank you for watching.